So, as Jessica mentioned, we'll be talking about the improvements and innovations in CMMI that we've been able to achieve throughout some of the organizations we work with and at Hewlett-Packard Enterprise. I'd like to acknowledge some of the folks that have been involved in this, primarily Francine Klein, Judy England, Christy Lawrence, and Raquel Tobal throughout Hewlett-Packard Enterprise have been involved in these improvements. I'm one of two lead appraisers currently in Hewlett-Packard Enterprise, so I've been coordinating a lot of the improvements and helping with them, and got elected to do the webinar. So what we'll talk about in the webinar today is a bit of introduction to make sure everybody's on the same page with the first two agenda items here. So we'll talk about, at a high level, what is CMMI, the perception and reality of CMMI usage and appraisals. CMMI fit into the modern world of some of the modern approaches in the first two points. We'll spend most of our time in the last bullet in the agenda, the updated methods and tools that address current issues. So how we're using an Agilist implementation at CMMI and talk about an agile CMMI architecture that we're using, and then also applying Lean Six Sigma concepts to the appraisal part of CMMI and how we're some of the benefits we've got from those activities. Like I said, we'll spend a few minutes to make sure everybody's grounded in understanding what is CMMI and the CMMI models and the current perceptions of CMMI. So CMMI itself, if you're not familiar with that model and the term, is its capability model, maturity model integration. It's really a suite of models and related materials to help organizations improve by defining best practices in industry, the improvement paths, and really focused at building capabilities and being able to measure yourself against the industry expected and industry best practices way of performing those capabilities. Within the CMMI suite, there's actually three what are called constellations. And a lot of people think of them as three models. There's CMMI for development, CMMI for services, and CMMI for acquisition. CMMI for development is focused at groups that develop things. It was originally based on CMMI for software, but it's really meant for developing anything. CMMI for services is focused at organizations that deliver services. So as opposed to developing things, they provide value in the performance of their activities. Whereas CMMI for acquisition is focused at organizations that acquire products and put them together for customers. So a considerable amount of shared areas within those models, and those are called the core process areas, and those are shared across all three models. So by implementing one of these models or constellations, you also are looking at a considerable amount of some of the other ones as well. So it's meant to be an integration of these, hence the CMMI, the integration in the term CMMI. The way that organizations are measured against these, then, is through the appraisals. There's three classes of appraisals, Class A, B, and C, that are defined in what's called the appraisal requirements for CMMI, the ARC. And Class A being the most rigorous, Class C being the least rigorous, Class B being somewhere in the middle. And again, I'm just setting the stage for those of you that are very familiar with CMMI. Just bear with me for a minute here. The traditional approach at implementing CMMI and using those appraisals is normally start out with an executive session or strategic direction of some kind with the executive team. Then you baseline the organization through a Class C appraisal, perform improvement iterations that you see in these circles inside the circle there, and then Class B appraisals, and then the A appraisal, you would validate the organization's maturity or capability. And like I said, the Class A appraisal is the only type of appraisal you can achieve a maturity level rating or or capability level rating from. Therefore, it's required if an organization is wanting to achieve that maturity level. The CMMI in this approach is very tried and true. It's been proven business benefits, but there's been a lot of discussion, at least that I've heard across the industry and actually within my company, of whether it still applies. And some of the overheard inaccurate perceptions are that CMMI is focused at building needless documentation and bureaucracy, and it's in conflict with modern techniques such as agile development, DevOps. It's declining in usage. It's only used in government work. And even in government work, there's been more of the modern techniques in agile development through like the 18F program and things like that people view as in conflict with CMMI. But as I mentioned in the title here, these are inaccurate. This is not true. What the reality is that CMMI is actually focused on building and evaluating critical capabilities. It doesn't presuppose any defined approach. It doesn't presuppose or limit the usage, the organization size or type, and it's not declining in usage, and it's not only used in the public sector. In fact, we see that over 70% of the appraisals performed include agile projects and organizations. Greater than 58% are performed in organizations less than 100 people. In fact, I'm performing an appraisal that I'm taking a break from to do this webinar right now, and that organization is very small. Less than 20 people in that organization. And some of the organizations I've worked with are less than 5 people. So it's used very effectively in large and small organizations. It's not declining in usage. There's been greater than 20% increase in new appraisals in 2015, and we're seeing, and from what I understand so far, they're seeing an increase year over year in 2016 as well. And it's not only used in public sector. In fact, more than 95% are outside the public sector work. So, these perceptions, well, the perceptions really are coming from the traditional usage of CMMI. Some of that traditional usage that we saw in some of those slides earlier sometimes can take too long. It can be documentation focused, can be not relevant. So it depends on how you actually apply CMMI. The appraisals can provide little value in the rating or maturity level. They can be costly, can be little information to the organization. But if they're applied correctly, then we use the current methods, things like agile improvement techniques or agile development techniques, things like lean on the way that we apply CMMI. And some of the concepts in Scaled Agile Framework, for example, and how we apply CMMI and use what's been some of the more current learnings in the industry to apply these best practices. The best practices are still tried and true, but we have to make sure that we're in line with the current industry learnings and how we apply those to ensure we're getting the value out of those. So what you see on the left in this slide are the variable ways of implementing CMMI and performing appraisals if you're not applying it correctly, and the more desirable if you are applying it correctly. And the goals of CMMI are well documented. It's proven that there are lower costs, increased revenue, it's improved customer satisfaction, higher employee morale. And you see this through organizations that have applied CMMI appropriately and correctly, and the data that we've